Since the beginning of motorcycling, people have looked for ways to make their machines more useful. With the explosion of the American automobile industry, manufacturers faced huge pressure to stay competitive. It took over 3 decades for a company called Goulding to really figure it out. We're out back of the restoration shop here at Wheels Through Time, working on another incredibly rare machine from inside the museum collection, the 1945 Harley-Davidson Gould car. Now, only a handful of these motorcycles ever produced, and this is one of very, very few remaining examples. We're gonna get this thing running and fired up and riding for you guys here in just a few short minutes. But what I wanna do first is kind of tell you some of the history of this machine and the history of the Goulding, a history of the Harley-Davidson Flathead. We're gonna run over some of the features of this and what makes it so special. So you guys hang with us. Definitely gonna be a sight to see when we get it cranked up. Now, the Gould car is the ultimate motorcycle workhorse. And it starts really around the Harley-Davidson big twin chassis. So people have been using motorcycles for utility vehicles since the very beginning. They start out with, with early tri-cars, 2 wheels in front, 1 wheel in back. In the 19-teens, 1920s, you see the explosion of the sidecars. Harley-Davidson sidecars, Indian sidecars. Many companies used aftermarket sidecars as workhorse vehicles. And eventually you see those cars being adapted to traffic boxes with delivery boxes, all sorts of uses for these machines. Oftentimes they came up short. They just weren't able to do the work. Now the Gould car was kind of the pinnacle of that motorcycle workhorse. So 3-wheel vehicles, 2 in back, 1 in front. They kind of start with the Harley-Davidson Survey cars. In 1932, Harley-Davidson debuted the Survey car. Survey car was a 45 cubic inch chain drive rear end, 3-wheel. It's the one you see with the box on the back. Harley-Davidson actually produced the Survey car all the way through, I think, 1973 or 1974. So incredibly long running. You see them as police vehicles. You see them as delivery vehicles. Auto parts places and repair shops would use Survey cars for house calls. So incredibly useful machines. But when it comes to heavy duty lifting, they just weren't up to it. The little 45 cubic inch engine wasn't much, and the chain drive just couldn't take the hard work. So the Gould car fixes all that and takes it all to the next level. Now, this machine I actually got from a good friend of mine. His name's Eric Dunk. When I got the machine, it was relatively incomplete. So Eric was a Harley dealer in New York, actually had this machine for some time now. Over the years, Eric actually acquired this from a good friend of ours, Rocky Halter. Rocky was one of the past president of the Antique Motorcycle Club of America. Rocky's been wheeling and dealing Indian parts for decades. I actually came across this Harley-Davidson Gould car setup in pretty dilapidated condition and got to work on putting this thing back together. So when I got this bike from Eric, it was missing all sorts of stuff. There was no engine, no front end on the bike, missing gas tanks, missing an oil tank. And over about 1.5 years time, right here at Wheels Through Time, I got this bike back together. So, or I should say this trike back together. So the core of it, the neat thing about the Harley-Davidson Gould car is what it's based on is the Harley-Davidson big twin chassis. So flathead engines, always considered the workhorse, low compression, big torque. These machines are fantastic for riding on 2 wheels. When I look at Harley-Davidsons, they had overhead valves and they had flatheads. You look at the overhead stuff as kind of like maybe the performance motorcycles, and you look at the flatheads like the utility machines. So Harley-Davidson made flatheads in 3 configurations from 1937 onward. They made the 45 cubic inch job, they made 74s, and they made 80 cubic inch job. This Harley-Davidson Gould car is set around the 80 cubic inch Harley-Davidson ULH engine. So the chassis itself is Harley-Davidson standard big twin chassis. So while we're looking at a pile of trike here, a pile of motorcycle, it all starts with the exact same motorcycle that Harley-Davidson sold in the dealerships. 2-wheel machine, standard twin down tube frame, big twin engine, 4-speed transmission, classic horseshoe oil tank, split tanks. It's Harley-Davidson Springer fork they used through all the way 1948. And it takes very few modifications to turn this thing into an actual Gould car. So a little bit about Goulding, guys. The Goulding company is started by James Goulding. Goulding was Australian, started producing sidecars in Australia, I think as far back as 1910. Moved to the United States, I think is in the early 1920s, 1922 or 23. So Goulding continued sidecar productions in the United States, starting in Milwaukee, moved to Saginaw, Michigan, and continued to produce sidecar all the way through the 1950s. As time goes on, James kind of sees how the Servicar and the Indian Dispatch Tow are falling short. So what he decides to do is build basically a Servicar, a Harley-Davidson Servicar on steroids, utilizing the Harley-Davidson Big Twin motorcycle. So the coolest part about this is just by removing your rear fender and your rear wheel from a Harley-Davidson two-wheeler, you can bolt on the Gould car and get right to work. So what Jimmy Goulding did, this is super cool, Steve. Come on around this side. So you guys see the Harley-Davidson frame, okay? This is your Harley-Davidson Big Twin frame. This whole setup is actually an attachment, okay? So pulled off that rear fender, pulled out the rear wheel, and the real trick of this whole scenario is really what's down here underneath. So after pulling out the rear wheel and the rear fender, what they did was they slid in this transfer box right where your rear wheel and fender goes. So the transfer box is actually a Model T pumpkin that's been turned around backwards. So this was actually part of a Model T rear end, would have had axles coming out each way and big wheels, 19, 21 inch wheels on the outside. What they've done is lopped off the axles altogether, welded on this big sprocket, put a cap over on this side, and now the shaft drive, this would have been the input, is now the output towards the rear end. So as you can see up front, guys, this thing has the same primary drive, engine and transmission are in the same location as the Harley-Davidson Big Twin, and then that transmission, the 4-speed, or in this case a 3-speed with reverse transmission, runs right back here to this big sprocket that's been welded onto the transfer box. So as the transfer box, the Model T rear pumpkin, the output here, there's an adjustable shaft. Now this part here is really tricky. It's telescopic right here, guys. And the reason for that is as your chain loosens up front from your transmission to the rear end, this has to slide forward and backwards. So you joint like normal, and then there's a splined male-female section right here that allows this pumpkin to actually slide backwards and forwards and still engage with that shaft. Now, as you move further back, the super beefy part here, guys, is the Studebaker rear end. And Goulding, for the Gould car, started with the Studebaker rear end, incredibly heavy duty. The thing is, I think, advertised as 1,000-pound capacity. It sits on these big beefy leaf springs here. It's got hydraulic brakes, so there's actually a master cylinder mounted up underneath the bed here, and hydraulic brakes to the rear end. So the thing's got great stopping power. Like I said, 1,000-pound capacity. This thing absolutely hauls 1,000 pounds, guys. That's 2 Harley-Davidson knuckleheads. So you're talking big capabilities here from a trike. A Harley-Davidson Servicar kind of limited in its ability. The Gould car, you can put 2 motorcycles in the back here. There's actually tie-down straps. So what were these things used for? I mean, you can imagine they were used for just about anything. This one in particular came from a Harley dealer named Harry Molinar in Hammond, Indiana. Harry actually had a couple of these Gould cars. And Harry used this at the Iliana Speedway. They'd haul broken bikes down. So the racetrack, guys, guy wrecks, guy's bike breaks down, blows up. They'd send this thing out on the track to go pick up the broken down bikes. Same thing from the dealership. During the week, he gets a call, guy breaks down on the side of the road. I've got rumors of Harry sending his mechanics out as much as 100 miles to pick up motorcycles to bring back to the dealership to repair. So like I said, guys, incredibly useful. Cruising speed is the same cruising speed as a Harley-Davidson two-wheeler for the most part. It'll honk down the road. I've had it up to about 60 miles an hour. Really, that's probably as fast as you want to go. 60 miles an hour. It's a lot of weight. You're still on that Harley-Davidson Springer fork. So it's a little bumpy in front, smooth as it gets in back. Transfer of power is really pretty incredible. Now, some of the other stuff over here, guys, what we're looking at, and I told you, I got this bike in relatively incomplete condition. It was a long time since this thing had run. And what I did was gathered all the proper parts to put it back together. So one of the things, now, the Harley Gould car, as we know it, I believe they only made about 13 of them, 14 of them maybe. Today, I think I know maybe 5 of them. There's actually another one here at Wheels Through Time Museum that's got a 1940 knucklehead engine in it. Incidentally, came from the same Harley-Davidson dealer, Harry Molinar. So one of the things that Harry commonly did on a lot of his motorcycles and on both of the Gould cars, after we found pictures of this thing, we realized Harry had the big gas tanks. So typically your Harleys of this era had 3.5 gallon gas tanks. These things have been widened out to maybe 6 gallon tanks. Again, it's carrying more weight, it's using more fuel. You send this thing out on road calls, you got to make sure you got enough fuel to get back. Now, with the flathead engine, these things are known for getting hot when they're working. So what he also did was had a big, large capacity oil tank. This oil tank's absolutely monster. Typically these things hold about 3.5 quarts. This thing probably holds 7 quarts. So what you've got is a ton more oil capacity, ability to keep that oil a lot cooler when you're running down the road and when you're hauling heavy weight. So trimmed out in 41-6 tanks. Now again, guys, this is a 1945 Harley Davidson. So the chassis is 45, the fork, the frame, gas tanks, all that proper era. So in getting this bike back going again, I actually restored a 1945 Harley-Davidson UL engine and bored it out to 80 cubic inches. Now, Harley made the big twin flatties. Like I was telling you, they made flatheads in various configurations for a long time. 1929 to 73. They made the 45 cubic inch flathead. Longest running motor in the history of internal combustion, at least until the Sportster took it over, as far as I know. The 74 and 80 cubic inch flatheads, they made from, let me think, 1930 to 1948. So initially, the Harley-Davidson VL total loss oil system didn't have the circulating oil system. And you guys might have caught up with us on some of our other videos where we kind of talk about the beginning of that circulating dry sump oil system and how revolutionary it was. So those early VLs, total loss oil system, actually had a completely different engine configuration. The bore was different, the stroke was different, the rod length was different. I think the VLs were big bore, shorter stroke, same dimensions as a knucklehead. I think is a 4-inch stroke and a 3 7/16 bore. What they did with the U model was they actually kind of got wise in using it more as a torque engine. They had the knucklehead for the performance engine, so they decided to take that flathead in more of a torque direction. Big, long connecting rod. The connecting rod's like 7.9, almost 8-inch long connecting rod. And then the stroke, they stroked it out to 4 9/32. So it's just over a 4 1/4 stroke. It's a whole nother 1/4 inch over the VL that was the predecessor to this bike. And then the 74s and the 80s, the only difference was big bore and small bore. So 3 5/16 on the 74s, 3 7/16 on the 80s. So they actually incredibly fun to ride. Even as a 2-wheeled motorcycle, you think utility vehicle, but the flatheads, they got a ton of torque. For riding up here in the mountains, they're excellent. When you adapt something like the Gould car to it, incredibly capable motorcycles. 4-speed transmission, or 3-speed plus reverse. So that same Harley Davidson 4-speed box, but it's got the sliding gear reverse setup. Now, one of the neat things when I pulled this transmission apart, the transmission was with the vehicle when I got it. It actually had a weird shift pattern in 36 and 37. Check this out, Steve. This is such rare stuff. In 36 and 37, the reverse was way up front, and then they had neutral, first, second, third. All of the other 3-speed with reverse transmissions, which Harley Davidson used, goodness, through, I mean, probably even into the late 70s, maybe even the 80s. The reverse transmission, usually reverse, first gear, neutral, second, third. So they've got neutral in between first and second gear. This one here's got a really weird shift pattern that they only used in 36 and 37 with reverse and then neutral. And then when you hit first, second, third, they're all right there, right next to each other. So I only got 39 miles on this thing since I restored it. It runs excellent. We're gonna go ahead and bolt this battery in here right now. And it's been about a year and a half since this thing is fired up and ran. We're going to add the battery, add a little bit of gas, and we ought to be firing up and running. So really cool stuff about the history of Goulding, guys. You know, Goulding was a pretty incredible motorcycle family. Like I said, James Goulding started producing the sidecars in Australia way back in the teens, moved to the United States. Both of his offspring were pretty incredible people and quite influential in the motorcycle world. You guys may have heard both of their names. One, Claude Goulding, was actually a Jack Pine winner. Claude won that a number of times. And then the most famous of his offspring, Dot Robinson. So Dot Robinson, an incredibly famous name in the motorcycling world. I believe one of the founders of the Motormaids. Dot was also a Jack Pine racer. Dot won the Jack Pine in 1937, racing against all the guys. Ran the sidecar class with one of her dad's sidecars and a Harley Davidson. And Dot ended up taking home the Class A victory in 1937, which is pretty incredible. 500 miles. An incredible accomplishment just to finish. And for a lady like Dot to take home the trophy on a race like that is quite remarkable. You know, Dot's story's an amazing one. Lifetime motorcyclist, AMA Hall of Fame member. Dot later married Earl Robinson and would become a Harley Davidson dealer, I believe in the 1930s also. So incredible family. So Goulding Company, into building utility vehicles from sidecars all the way to the Gould car, guys. So then remember, now they just made a handful of these Gould cars, and exactly why that is, I don't know. I can only speculate. When I say he figured it out, he made the most capable motorcycle utility vehicle that there ever was. There's no doubt about that. But by this time, the automobile industry was just too far ahead. There's no catching up. You know, you've got, huge trucks with incredible capabilities, and the work that one of these could do, it still had its place, but really was inherently limited in its production, just because when you're looking for something really capable, you got a pickup truck, you got a 1 ton of by this time they're making dually pickups. Every company was producing a vehicle that was quite capable. So, okay, we're gonna get this thing fired up. It shouldn't take much. We got the battery hooked up, we got power, good, we got power. We're sitting here in neutral. Let me add a little bit of gas, guys, and I think we can get this guy fired up here in a couple kicks. Now, like I said, it's been over a year, maybe a year and a half since we've run it. Cold start, obviously. First start in a long time. And I think we got enough gas in there. Man, those are big gas tanks. So a gallon barely covers the bottom. A couple gallons barely covers the bottom. But we're gonna fire this thing up, make a couple laps, and you never know, guys. One of these days we might be putting this thing to use again. 1945 Harley Davidson Gould car. Let's see if she goes. 1, 2, 3 prime kicks. We got gas. Here we go. Started right perfect, amazing. Vehicles. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notifications button. What you see inside Wheels Through Time, you can't see anywhere else. Rarest motorcycles anywhere in the world. 1945 Harley Davidson Gould Car, all powered by a Harley Davidson big twin flatty engine, the workhorse of Harley's lineup for decades. Tough stuff, guys. This thing's ready for use. Who knows, maybe one day down the road here we'll be putting this thing to use. Until then, I'm gonna make a couple more laps and enjoy the ride.